Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Monty's away this week, so I get the opportunity to share the garden with you. And there's loads gone on over the winter. About you, but my garden I think's possibly about 3 weeks behind where it was last year. So I'm still chopping, changing, moving things around, and this is one of them. This is lime balm. A lot of you might know lemon balm, but it's got sort of a subtler taste to it. We use it in teas, but also I've seen it stuffed in chicken and cooked that way. I've seen it used with fish, so really good herb. And the only thing with it, it can be a little bit thuggish, so what I'm doing is I'm just taking a chunk out of the back of this plant, and then I'll just move it to somewhere else in the garden. On today's programme, Francis travels to Devon to meet a woman who has a huge collection of unusual veg.
I discovered a whole world of perennial edible plants, hundreds, thousands of them.
Adderley continues her historical journey to discover how the perfect lawn became a national obsession.
Buying your first mower was like having your first car or television, and Sunday mornings were filled with the sound of lawns being cut.
And I will be planting this in an area of the garden that I'll be making some changes to. If you're anything like me, you're coming out re-engaging with the garden and noticing that the lawn maybe is carrying a little bit of damage from last year. We were out here one sort of Sunday tea time and it was getting a bit cold, so the kids sort of dragged the fire pit around here and we lit it while we were having a kick around on the lawn, and actually it got a little bit hot, so it's killed all the roots of this grass. So what I'm going to do is just repair this little patch. First of all, I'm going back into the decent turf, just cutting a nice neat edge. It's really easy then to take it out. Using the fork, take the old turf off, making sure that I'm leaving as much topsoil as possible. Just turn it all over to break up any compaction. So once I've broken it up, what I've got is a little soil and compost mix, and just by introducing some, it's that goodness back into the soil. So I'm going to turn that in. And then I know I said about, getting rid of compaction, but I do want that just firmed back in. I'm not jumping up and down on it. And then I'm going to rake across the top. That will create me a lovely little seed bed. So once that's all prepped, the next thing really is to sow the seed. And one of the things that people do wrong with this, if you've never done it before, is sow too much seed. I mean, look on the back of your packet that your seed comes in, and it'll tell you the sowing rates. If it doesn't sound top of the box, I'd probably go to about 20 grams a square metre. And when it comes to seed, there's lots of different types. This is just a standard lawn mix with a reasonable amount of ryegrass in it. But you've got slightly shadier conditions, you can choose seed that suits those. And if you want this instant, you could also do this, with a little bit of turf. And the preparation would more or less be the same. That's that done. And all I'm doing now is just working that seed into the surface. I'm doing that really because I'm working on a small area. In reality, if you're doing a big area of grass, you probably wouldn't go back over it all. So over the next few weeks, this really will need a good watering depending on the weather. And it has been a dry old start to the season. I mean, I think in reality, it's not just the cold weather that my garden's been so far behind, it's the lack of water. So the last thing I'm going to do is just cover it up. Since I moved in here, I reckon about 2,000 pigeons have as well. So you can guarantee the moment that I went indoors, they would be down here having a good feed. But this tiny bit of fleece would add a little bit more warmth and help with germination. But also it makes people stay off it. You know, the kids come straight back out in the garden, and if something's covered, they might not walk on it. That's just simply pinned in place. So there you go, that's nice and secure. What I'll do is I'll leave that until I can just see the slightest bit of green, uncover it, keep it watered over the next few weeks, and soon it'll look as green as the rest of it. I may not be a lawn connoisseur, but it does fascinate me, our relationship with the lawn. And a few weeks ago, Adverley went and explored the history of the lawn. Now, she's going to explain to us how they became a national obsession.
Garden lawns began at the front of big country houses in the landscape movement of the 1700s. At first, they were mown by sheep and by scythe, but by the mid-1800s, the Victorians had invented the first lawnmowers, which helped transform their gardens. They had been the domain of only the wealthy. But as lawns developed, they grew within the reach of the middle classes of women and sport. By the late 1800s, lawnmowers were creating a perfect surface for all kinds of outdoor pursuits. Cricket had been around for decades at houses like Goodwood. But now estates and parks started creating their own croquet lawns, like here at Brodsworth Hall. Croquet became incredibly fashionable, and by the end of the century it was the most widely played sport in Victorian England, partly because men and women could play together. Up until now, archery had been the only option. But on nice flat lawns, croquet was the new alternative, nearer the house and less risk of death. For Victorians who loved precision, the new mowers came with an added bonus. Rollers had been around for decades to flatten the ground, but mowers had an internal roller to help propel the cutting blades too. By cutting the grass short and rolling it, lawn stripes were created almost by accident, and that set off a whole new trend. Stripes gave more polish to the look of gardens, parks and lawns, and even more work for the gardeners to keep them straight. There was an attempt to make bigger, steam-driven mowers that powered themselves, but they received some damning reviews. A snorting, smoking, abominable thing working all day long and always just in front of the drawing room windows. As Britain entered the 20th century, everything changed. Big estates and their gardens fell into disrepair as devoted estate workers were called up to fight in 2 world wars, with many never returning. Somehow, between the wars, companies did manage to create the first mass-produced petrol-driven mowers which could power themselves. They were so simple, even women could use them. Imagine that. There had been adverts featuring women and mowers for decades, usually in unfeasible frocks. But during both wars, with women working alongside men as land girls and in the forces, attitudes and ambitions had changed. Having had a taste of freedom, women were not going back indoors anytime soon. So as Britain got back on her feet in the 50s and the middle classes moved from the cities to the newly built suburbs, gardens changed from a place to dig for victory and grow food into somewhere men and women could relax. Now there were veg patches tucked away, and for the first time ever, the luxury of a lawn. To have a beautiful lawn down the middle of your garden in the 60s and 70s showed your middle-class credentials. If it was striped and flanked in bedding, even better. Buying your first mower was like having your first car or television, and Sunday mornings were filled with the sound of lawns being cut. And just like on the big country estates, the morality of lawns are rife in the suburbs. An unkempt lawn was a sign of very low standards, so mowers were essential, and a growing band of manufacturers created faster, neater, lighter, easier to handle machines in electric and petrol. And soon, flares joined the array of mowing outfits. It's about now that Clive Gravitt, who provided and pushed all these fantastic vintage mowers, deserves a sit down. He has over 200 mowers and a museum of gardening in Sussex, so he knows all their stories, like the fact that fly mows were initially made of the same material as police riot shields, and why they changed colour. They look absolutely amazing. Can you tell me a bit about the blue one here?
Initially, all fly mows were blue, but fly mows used door-to-door selling, the salesman hoping to catch the housewife at home and be able to demonstrate how light and easy the fly mow was. When they were doing that selling, they also did a survey of 2,000 housewives asking what colour they would like the fly mow to be.
And they chose orange.
And they chose orange, yes.
If they were to have this survey again today, what do you reckon the colour might be?
Well, I think really orange is back again. We've gone full circle, so perhaps it will be the same.
I think you're right, because orange is the new blue.
Yes.
These days, lawns are a given in most gardens, although increasingly we are mowing less, knowing that longer grass is good for wildlife. But simple, green, grassy spaces bring a lot of joy. Lawns have played such an important part in the history of gardens and their evolution, and I think they do wonders for our well-being.
Looking at my slightly unkept lawn, I think the neighbours would be peering over the fence and definitely looking down their nose at me. Here I cut around the edges so it looks tidy, but the main area we only cut every 4 weeks. And down on the other lawn there, what I did is, as the year went on, I left some areas just to grow that little bit more, and I ended up with this beautiful yarrow meadow. And it's interesting, even in here, the amount of sort of wildflower that appears so quickly. And it does blow your mind as to how much wildlife really starts to use the green space. You might remember last year I planted these Iris reticulata and crocus circles all the way through this area, and they worked really well, gave us a good early splash of colour, but also provided for early pollinators. And now I know they look a little bit scruffy, but you've got to remember it's important, just because your bulbs have finished flowering, not to cut them back. We leave these for a good 6 weeks. This slightly scruffy looking green foliage is working hard. Photosynthesis is going on and goodness is being stored down in that bulb. And that's what's going to give you next year's flower. So we'll give it a few weeks and then we'll give the whole lawn a cut. But for me, doing that for wildlife, not just for us, is incredibly important. And now it's time for your first film. And it's a lady called Anne Hardy, who definitely gardens with wildlife in mind.
My name's Anna, and this is Plucky and Knick Knack, and welcome to our garden in Wiltshire. I like to keep things really naturalistic, really full of colour, and my planting is mostly in tune with nature and the wildlife around us. This is my wildflower cut flower raised bed. I've got a few hyacinths coming up in here, some tulips, and these are really good for making my wildflower jam jar posies. So they're sitting there in a bucket of water, conditioning, so basically having a big drink, and then I'll take them indoors and arrange them in a couple of hours. This area here is my no-dig flower patch. It's probably proper gardener's worst nightmare, but I love it. And the reason I'm filming here just now is because I've just spotted this gorgeous butterfly here. So thank you for joining me in my own garden. Weeds, wildflowers and insects all go very well together, and they also make a wonderfully therapeutic and very colourful space for the humans in them.
I really love Anne's thinking behind her garden, and you can see what joy it brings. Woodland over there has been really good this year. A little bit of transition period now before the bluebells pop up, but for me that area doesn't need a lot of colour. It carries texture and interest. But I appreciate that not everybody's got a woodland, but I think to have that taste of a woodland outside your back door is achievable in a container. And I've got an old galvanised bath, but it could be any old pot really. And I've been down the nursery and picked myself a load of sort of woodland plants. I'm just going to create a setting. I've mixed up some topsoil, and then I've used some composted bark and then peat-free compost. As far as putting these things together, what I normally try and do is work off a key plant. So here we've got Dryopteris stuartii, and it's really good for shady conditions, semi-evergreen as well, so in a softer winter won't die back, and it's got this fantastic sort of limey green foliage early in the season. And then this little beauty is a semi-aquilegia, and you can tell it is because actually there's no spurs on the flower. So what I'm going to do is use that more or less as the central piece, coming up through that Dryopteris there. That beautiful, delicate foliage sat with those flowers. So next we've got an epimedium, and in the nursery this caught my eye because it's called Amber Queen, and I have a daughter that's called Amber. But I love the foliage on these, and look at the flowers. The flowers look like sort of four-legged spiders, and I think they'll work really well with that semi-aquilegia. So work that in here, And now we've got a little polysticum, lovely sort of semi-evergreen fern. Probably likes it slightly more moist than the Dryopsis. Won't get to much more than about a foot, but you've got that beautiful sort of dense foliage. There we go, so that's in. And now I'm going to come back to the back here, and this is a Streptopus, which is actually related to Solomon's seal. I put some of this in the woodland last year and it worked beautifully. Beautiful, delicate flower. That's sitting in there nicely. And now we've got another fern. This is Dryopteris sabordii. Look at the foliage on it. That beautiful sort of limey green colour. And lastly, I've got Thalictrum. And this is called Purple Marble. Look at the foliage on that. It's incredible. For me, it's about the shapes, the forms, the texture. So all I'm doing now is just backfilling, just trying to work the compost in the gaps. But what will happen as well, the moment I water this, the compost will settle round the root systems. We're nearly there. I'm just top dressing with that composted bark. The idea that it's just this beautiful woodland floor, it will hold some moisture in. I'll feed that a couple of times this year just with a liquid feed. A lot of those plants will outgrow the space eventually, but back end of the year I might tease one or two things out, put them in their own pots, or even they might work their way into the garden. But these woodland plants do catch my eye. In fact, I would probably quite happily admit to the fact that I've got an obsession with them. I go to a show or a nursery, these are the kind of plants that end up in the back of my car. Maybe all of us have got a passion for a particular plant, and we've now got a chance to go back again and meet Sheila Chapman, who I would say definitely has a passion for clematis.
Once you get hooked on clematis, that's the end of it. You're with them for life. I've always said clematis, should be clematis, and 1 in 10 say fuchsia. I've got about 120 clematis in the garden. It's a good way of going to sleep at night because you can just try counting them all the way round and you've fallen asleep before you've finished. Clematis are so versatile. You can put them up pergolas, through trees, over bushes. You can have the little tiny ones at the edge of the borders. There's just so much you can do with them. When I had the nursery, that was all consuming. It was leaving early in the morning, getting home late in the evening, and then having to do paperwork. And I had 2 years where I only had 5 days off, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. When I packed up, I brought all the clematis I could that were left and hadn't been sold back to my garden. When you go out to buy clematis, if you choose the small liners that you can get and are quite cheap, you have to grow them on in a 2-litre pot for about a year until the roots are right the way round, then plant them out, because the stronger the plant, the better it'll perform in the garden. There is a saying that you head in the sun, feet in the shade, but the reason they're in the shade is because it conserves moisture. So long as you water well, they can be planted in full sun. Try to place clematis so that it enhances the plant that's already there. I think every climbing rose has got at least 1 clematis going through it, and I put them up pergolas, over arches, on obelisks, and in the general border, so they mix with other plants. It's just a case of your own personal combination. And here we've got the Rose Catherine Morley, soft pink, and the herbaceous Integrifolia Heather Herschel. And I think you'll agree these look fantastic because you don't have to have clematis just with climbing roses. You can have them with freestanding roses as well. This is one of my favourites. This is Golden Tiara. You have the small yellow, beautiful flowers with the mauve centre that matches up with Victoria that's trying to attack me over here. It also has lovely buds, usually lime green in colour, and it also goes with a Graham Stewart Thomas rose. These are all my either cuttings or seedlings. 150 of these are the ones that have self-sown. I'm very lucky that I've got clematis seedlings coming up all through the garden, and they seem to see themselves in exactly the right place. This little one here seeded itself many, many years ago, and it's just gone from strength to strength. Another bonus with growing clematis is when the flowers are finished, you've got such wonderful seed heads. This is the large late-flowered variety called Karoo. I grow it on obelisks, many of which came from the nursery, but it's sentimental reason as well, but they do add height all round the border. As you can see, I've spiralled the stems all the way round so that the plant covers the whole area and it doesn't just go straight to the top and then go flying away and looking a bit weird and wonderful like a triffid. Now, with the pergola, you have the uprights. It has all the clematis going over, so you've got extra interest. On the back of the pergola, with the fence, we have the Rose Awakening, which is pale pink and quartered. And when that's out, and you've got the clematis as well, you've got these beautiful large purple clematis. It's just one mass of impact of what you can do when you have clematis and roses together, and you've got a good support to put them on. I think no garden can be without a clematis or 10, because there's so many different shapes and you can put them with something, so when something's gone over, you've got the clematis to continue with the flowering. Do what you like with them. They're very amenable.
Interesting, Sheila talking about clematis being amenable. These are a plant, Aeoniums, that for me, it seems that the meaner you are to them, the better they perform. And I think another 2-3 weeks and I can put these plants out and dot them all the way through the gravel garden. So all I'm doing really is just starting to clean them up. I'm taking a lot of the dead foliage off. And this one, I think, is just ready to go into a larger pot. And when it comes to potting them up, so the compost that I'm using is peat-free. All I've done is put a couple of handfuls of soil in there, but there's a good 30–40% horticultural grit. It's the dry conditions that these plants benefit from. We put all that round. Work that in, and then what I like to do after that is just top it off just with some of the grit. It brings the plant alive and shows the colour of those leaves. I don't feed these at all. Actually, just stop a second. You hear that? That's red kite. And what is being in the garden all about? It's those little moments. There's 2 red kite up there, just sailing around. Absolutely incredible. Anyway, back to this. When you look at succulent plants, I think one thing that always amazes me is they seem to draw young people in. My kids absolutely love these, and cactus as well. The boy's got some in his bedroom. And on that note, we've now got your next home film, and it's a lad called Edmund Roberts, and I would say he's taken that interest in cactus and succulents to a whole new level.
Hello Gardeners World, I'm Edmund and I'm 13, and I'd love to show you what I've been getting up to in the greenhouse during lockdown. I love collecting different cacti and succulents when going to garden centres and shows. And I think a great way to get new cacti is to propagate from existing plants. So these have been growing sort of babies. I'm going to be propagating that on. So I'm going to try and tease this off the mother plant, try and not damage it. And then there we are, so I've got another plant that has rooted. So I can then put that in this pot. So I'm going to put this in the compost, in the potting mix. Then I'm going to try and put some compost around it to anchor it in. Now I'm going to water that gently, like that. And then I'm just going to add a bit of grit around the edge so it will help anchor in the plant. And here we are, so that's done. So I hope I've inspired many of you to get outside in your gardens and enjoy the green spaces around you.
Edmund, that was the first thing my nan ever taught me to propagate, cacti. But she didn't give me a glove, so I had to sit there in the evenings pulling all these little prickles out of my finger. Keep it up, young man. Look, I remember last year, this shrub, it's a Phlomis. We were pruning it and it performed beautifully. You can still see the remnants of the flowers. But it does feel like it's been a really long, cold, wet winter. And this has had a proper mullering. Interestingly enough, you might hear people talk about microclimates and gardens. It's amazing how a few degrees can be the difference between a plant doing well and not. Look in front of you. You know, we're talking about 10 foot away, but that Phlomis over there is tucked back against that wall. And that wall, I think, sucking up any warmth there is, holds it and then releases it like a radiator, and that's helped that plant through the winter months. But there is hope. But if you look in there really closely, you can see there's just little signs of life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roughly prune it and then see how it gets on over the next few weeks. And then I'm going to tidy it all back up when I know exactly where it's going to shoot from. But while I finish that, still to come on today's programme. We meet a man who has been breeding some incredible new varieties of elder.
I might grow thousands and thousands of plants to produce just one good plant. This is my nerdy side.
And I'll be adding some structural shrubs to a new border I'm creating. But first, Francis has gone to Devon to meet a lady who grows the most amazing veg.
I always try to spend as much time as I can on my allotment, simply because growing fruit and veg for myself and my family is such a lovely thing to do. But I'm always keen to learn from other growers and experiment with what I grow myself. So I've come to Devon to learn more about the incredibly exciting things that are growing here. This 5-acre plot is co-owned by several families. They grow and swap the kinds of familiar vegetables that we often grow on our allotments and gardens, most of which are annuals and grow from seed each year. But one member, Mandy Barber, prefers to push the grow your own boundaries, choosing instead to grow perennial vegetables, which once they're in the ground, come back year after year. Mandy has been a passionate veg grower all her life, but since she discovered her first perennial vegetable, she has never looked back. There's so much, isn't there?
I know, it does feel very abundant, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So what got you into all of this?
Well, about 12 years ago, I discovered a plant called a perennial 9-star broccoli, which was a fantastic plant that grew for about 5 years, and that was the beginning of a great perennial vegetable adventure, I think. and I discovered a whole world of perennial edible plants, hundreds, thousands of them.
So how many have you actually got here?
I did try and do a count the other day because I was trying to stick labels on them all.
Yes.
And I think it got up to about 220 or something.
And you're not growing these just to eat them, you're also researching them, is that right?
Yeah, testing them out, potential future food crops.
I mean, I knew of a few basic perennial veg, but I just had no idea there was such a huge variety of them. It's kind of incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what is this plant here?
This is Good King Henry.
Okay.
And who doesn't want to grow a plant called Good King Henry? So this is a green leafy vegetable, a bit like spinach, and it's been grown for centuries. And there are 3 harvests: an early spring harvest of the young tender green leaves, and then the unopened flowering shoots can be used a little bit like an asparagus spear. And then amazingly, as it's a relative of quinoa as well, the seeds can be harvested and used as a quinoa substitute. And these really have any pests at all. I really don't need much looking after.
Do you feed it or?
I haven't done anything to this one. It's quite happy on its own.
How do you propagate this?
The best method is to sow it in autumn in a nice big pot, sort of surface sow, and then just ignore it basically for a couple of months, and then one day you'll be walking past your pot and you'll see hundreds of little seedlings coming up.
Good old Good King Henry. Wow. What is this? This is amazing.
Well, these are the lovely climbing vines of Apios americana, which is also called hockness.
Right.
This was once an important food for Native American people. Out of all the roots and tubers I grow, I think this has got a very special place in my heart.
Why is that?
Well, they have everything going for them. They're like beautiful vines. Later in the summer, they'll have the most gorgeous purpley pink maroon flowers.
Right.
And they have the most delicious tubers, a bit like the best plate of chips that you've ever eaten. So this is a single tuber, which is probably about the average size that you'd get.
Right.
These are grown in containers. When it comes to harvest time, you can tip the whole thing out once the vines have died back.
Okay.
And then most of your tubers will have accumulated in the pot, so it's an easier way of harvesting.
And are they hardy?
The tubers themselves are very, very hardy, so they can stay in the ground over winter.
I think I might have to grow one of these myself. It's absolutely lovely. I love it. One of the issues with annuals for those of us who don't have a greenhouse or polytunnel is that we can't produce fruit and vegetables until the weather warms up, which means we're left with what's known as a hungry gap. But perennials have a really strong root system, which means they get going as soon as the temperatures rise.
This is a Hablizia tamnoides, also known as Caucasian spinach, herbaceous perennial climber, and the leaves can be used just like spinach or used as a salad leaf. And the wonderful thing about this is that you don't need to take up a cultivated bed or a sunny part of your garden. They'll actually thrive really well in a shady, quite damp spot.
Wow.
It goes from a few centimetres very early in the year. By May, June time, it would have reached about 3 metres in height.
And it's hardy?
Tolerate down to -25, -30.
That's what I love here. There are so many fascinating plants to whet the perennial veg appetite, like perennial leek, dwarf Jerusalem artichoke, and skirret, a kind of root vegetable. The list goes on. Now, this is a plant that I do know well. This is sea kale, or Crambe maritima, and I know it from childhood because it grows all around the coast where I grew up and all around the coasts in the UK. It's edible and it's beautiful. The new shoots, when they emerge through the sand or the shingle, are a lovely rich purpley colour, but you can force them, like rhubarb, and they'll be paler and more tender. But even if you don't force them, the tender young leaves are delicious. You steam them, add butter, they're lovely. Or you can eat the florets before they flower and cook them like broccoli, or let them flower and then eat these lovely little seeds, which are a little bit like peas. If you want to grow sea kale, don't go and dig it up from the wild. It's protected, so it's illegal to do that. But it's widely available in nurseries, or you can buy the seeds and sow them yourself. And this beautiful architectural and delicious plant will grace any garden. You see, to me, this just shows how ornamental edibles can be. You don't have to compromise on beauty as well as it being functional.
I know, that's the wonderful thing about an edible ornamental garden. You don't have to separate your vegetable garden from your flower garden.
But what is this one?
This is Taunton Dean, which is an old West Country perennial kale. You can harvest the leaves all year round. Traditionally, they would be passed from neighbour to neighbour just through cuttings. Its other name is actually cottager's kale, which sort of makes reference to its use by ordinary folk over the centuries. And that's the thing that's kept this variety alive, where so many have disappeared.
I mean, for me, this just is what's so special about perennial veg. You plant it out once, you don't have to do anything to it, and it looks amazing. And in the spirit of passing things on, would I be able to have a cutting of this, please?
Of course, you definitely need your own Taunton Dean.
I think so too.
Hey, that garden was right up my street. They're absolutely incredible. And that array of perennial veg. And I'm in a new part of the garden. Well, a part of the garden that I'm changing. I'm feeling so excited about. This is going to be ultimately an ornamental kitchen garden. So I'm going to plant the ornamentals and the edibles all in one space. We did a little trial last year in 2 beds, and it was fascinating, creating sort of this layer system, starting with trees, shrubs, and then herbaceous planting, and then my veggies, and it worked really well. I had less pest problem, but interestingly, I used less water in that space than the normal veg garden. But I love the idea of interplanting. So what I've done so far, all the beds are set out. Trees have gone in, so I've got a couple of apple trees. That sets the first sort of part of the layer, and then all the shrubs in this space are edible. So I've got currants, I've got raspberries, I've got gooseberries. And then right through the middle of the plot, I've put this river of strawberries, which I think will look great when they come in a flower and then as they fruit. And now what I'm doing is adding some of that perennial veg. This was the lime bulb, and you can be really brutal with it, just chop it up. And this is one of these perennial kales that they were talking about, but lovely sort of variegated version. So this is called panache. Apparently this got a lovely nutty flavour. And once it sort of matures a little bit, you can more or less pick it all the way through the year. And as far as soil's concerned, over the winter, I prep this area with an awful lot of organic matter. So I put a lot of farmyard manure in. The kale was just really prepping a nice sort of deep hole, and I think firming it in really well. There you go. Incredible once it really does get going. But the principle of this could be done in a border. Try a few things. This is perennial chicory. Grows to about 1 metre once it flowers. Beautiful blue flower. Use the leaves in salads, but also the roots are used in cooking as well. Interesting for me with this one to see if it seeds around at all. I know you're looking at the moment and thinking it looks more like a dandelion, but look at the leaves. Beautiful sort of dark vein on it. And these will get a good sort of 2 foot. So I'm going to put sort of 3 of these in here. And I've just got one that I'm going to stick in over there. So there you go. Over the coming weeks, I'll have more perennial veg, annual veg, herbs, flowers. So I'm hoping by the back end of the season, not only will it look beautiful, but it will be incredibly productive. Now it's time for your last home film, and it's all the way from Oslo. And it's a lady called Jenny, and I think she's proven exactly what can be grown in a small space.
My name's Jenny, and I'm sending this film from Oslo, Norway's capital. I wanted to show everyone what you can achieve on a small 8 square meter balcony if you want to retreat from the world. We have quite a few climbers on this balcony, including a rambling rose. This is the Danish 1930s hybrid called Lykkefund, and it's really prolific at this moment. It is a single bloomer, however, and we've got a bunch of clematis that are intertwined with it. As well, we have the English rose Boscabel, which smells absolutely magnificent at the moment. I wish you guys could smell it. We have some planting in smaller planters. This includes irises and gladioli, which are just coming up here in Norway, as well as sweet peas and a bunch of flowers that we have hanging over the edge. In addition, we do have some veg here. We have some tomatoes and herbs and some cucumbers growing in these pots. We have quite a lot of seating out here so that we can socialize. As you can see, we've planted a lot of things vertically, including the honeysuckle behind me and the alpine clematis on my right. This means we can maximize the space on our small balcony.
Jenny, I think your film is a wonderful reminder that gardening connects so many of us from all around the world. This is a wilder part of the garden that I've been developing over the last few years. I love the way that it carries this beautiful atmosphere, and there's a calmness about it. Looking at the moment, the white comfrey is singing. I let it seed around. It can be a little bit thuggish, but I'll cut it back when it's finished flowering and turn it into fertiliser. And then you've got things like the primroses with beautiful soft yellows. And then cowslips just popping up. And when you look further down, I've even got cobnuts and wild elder. As that all passes on, you know, things like the cow parsley will arrive. And I think in my head it's playing with that idea of what is a garden? Is it controlled, neat and tidy, or is it something wilder? Because when you think back to the early plant breeders, they were starting from wild plants, and they created plants that ultimately we know and love today. And now we've got another chance to catch up with a fascinating man that's doing just that with elders.
I'm Ed Brown. I'm the National Collection holder of elderflowers. I just like them. They're easy to look after, anyone can grow them. They're beautiful. They're overlooked by people. There's more to an elder than just that weed in a hedge. There are 126 named varieties of elderflower, and I have bred another 11 new varieties. But I'm very selective. It takes a long time for me to choose. I might grow thousands and thousands of plants to produce just one good plant, and that could take 5 years. This is my nerdy side. This is Sambucus nigra crossed canadensis. It's a hybrid I did in 2011. It has particularly good, very large flowers. In a good year, they can get as big as a dustbin lid. Naming plants is a bit difficult, so I just generally look at what's around me, and so I came down the lane and I walked through the gate into the field. So Sambucus, gate in field. I realised one day when walking through the collection field that all of my elders look, smell and taste different. So some have a citrus scent, some smell of burnt rubber, some smell of oranges. What it's caused is my mind to explode into wanting to breed more new flavours for cordial and champagne. I've been making elderflower champagne for 7 years. This is the red one. I'm really pleased with the colour. It has amazing scent and amazing flavour. This is Sambucus chocolate marzipan. It has black leaves on the top and mint green leaves underneath. And it has the most amazing marzipan scented flowers. That marzipan scent comes right through into the cordial. Down here, I have Sambucus black cherries. The darkest one I've ever produced. It's got amazing dark underside to the petals. This comes right through into your cordial. And amazingly, it tastes of cherries. Harvesting your elderflowers is about respect for the plant. Respect your elders. So, when you're harvesting elderflowers, try and avoid cutting more than 30% off your tree in a year. If you cut all of the flowers off, it will try and reflower again the same year. This depletes the plant and you will end up losing the plant eventually. So, remember, respect your elders, only cut off 30% and leave the rest for the wildlife.
Interesting man. I'd quite happily share a nice glass of that pink stuff and chat elders for a couple of hours. I'm creating a sort of ornamental bed, but I want it to link back with the gravel garden, but also at the same time I want it to have a connection with the wilder part of the garden. And the first thing I'm going to do is get the structure planting in. So when it comes to designing it, straight away I walk in here and there's a big void up above my head. So though the whole area is sort of surrounded by trees, there's a big gap. So if I put something in there, you know, straight away it's going to start to connect things together. And the one tree that I'm feeding off here is that cherry plum. There's a real dark colour and it's the only dark thing in here. So what I want to do is develop that in the structural planting. So I've gone for this red nut here, which is Corylus maxima red zeller nut. That picks up straight away on that cherry plum. This is a lovely plant. It'll fill that void. I can lift the canopy on it if I want to, but also at the same time, if it gets too big, I can stall it back. What's great about this nut, it's got a red nut on it, but also what I love is this is a laburnum. So you imagine when this is covered in yellow flower, these two against each other look really incredible. So the next thing I've gone for is this elder. And I'm just trying to create, I suppose, a rhythm through the space. If I bring that somewhere here, straight away I can see this sort of movement of colour all the way through. So that's Sambucus thundercloud. This plant, if I leave it, will probably get to 4 metres, but I can prune it. You know, so if you've got a smaller space, you could grow an elder in a pot outside the back door. And then lastly, what I want to do is add this rose. So this is Rosa glauca, which is a species rose. It's got lovely pink single flower, followed by these incredible hips. If I leave it, it'll get to 1.5 metres, but I can cut it. You could grow this in a hedge. So now I've actually created that rhythm all the way through the space. I don't want to stop there. What I now want to do is jump back over the grass pathway into the meadow. So I'm going to put one of these Rosa glauca into the grass. Well, I better get on and start planting them. And while I'm doing that, here's a few jobs that you could be doing over the weekend if you fancy it. If you grow rhubarb, at this time of year, a flower spike may appear. If it does, it's a good idea to remove the flower stem as close to the base as possible using a sharp knife. This will ensure that all the plant's energy goes into leaves and roots and not into producing flowers and seed, making for a better crop next year. It is the beginning of the British asparagus season, and now it is time to start picking. Choose any emerging spear about 6 to 8 inches long. Cut an inch below the soil and continue to harvest every few days. But only start to pick after the plant has been established for 3 years. I grow my sweet peas in long pots, 3 plants in each. When the plant has grown several healthy pairs of leaves, pinch out the top using your finger and thumb. This will promote vigorous side shoots and put the energy into going outwards and not up. Grow them, keeping them well watered and fed until you are ready to plant out. This meadow area is really starting to come alive now. But we had a bit of a problem over the winter and this old plum tree lost that limb, so I'm just hoping no disease has got in there. But I think it gave me an opportunity. It's left a big void on this side of the tree, so I've created this little frame, which is quite simple, just out of nut sticks, to get an old rambling rose up there and grow into that void. I was just tying it in. It's a good time of year to tie up the climbers and your ramblers. And all I do when I tie it is, if you imagine, as I'm tying the first knot in around the post, I then create a figure of 8, and that stops the plant actually rubbing against the stick that I'm tying to. But we were busy over the winter and I started doing some major pruning on the apples, trying to create this slightly curved canopy as if the apples are sort of hanging down into the garden. Well, that's it from us. Hope you've enjoyed yourselves. Hold on. Well, that's perfect timing, isn't it? So, I was saying, Monty will be back next week at Longmeadow. In the meantime, look after yourselves. What are you saying? Say bye? Yeah, he says bye-bye as well. Come on in, let's get on.